Hi guys, in this episode we're going to be taking a look at the Moza HGP Shifter, a 7 forward gear shifter boasting an all metal construction and coming in considerably cheaper than Fanatec's ClubSport SQ. It doesn't end there though, so let's take a look at it and see what else it has to offer. It's clear to see from the outside that Moza are true to their word when it comes to using an all metal body with the shifter, using a CNC machined chassis and featuring 8 gates, 7 for forward gears and a reverse gear. Reverse and 7th are locked, requiring downward force in order to select them. This makes sense for reverse, but I'm not sure about 7th gear. The gear knob can be replaced with an aftermarket alternative depending on your preference, and in hand the shifter feels pretty sturdy, though not as heavy as I was expecting. When test fitting the aftermarket knobs I have in hand, it proves to be either too big or too small to fit this thing, and too big or too small for the space that I have to actually install the shifter. I can confirm from testing though that my Sparco gear knob fits this shifter, albeit not in my rig because of the cramped space I have. The HGP shifter has a number of mounting options, and I found an option that works for me, allowing the use of the shifter even in my tight cockpit space. I say room, but reverse is still a bit tight in here, especially with the stock round gear knob. Still, it was a pleasant surprise to be able to mount this directly to my aluminium profile rig without having to resort to additional plates of any kind. Looking at the bottom of the shifter unit, it is clear that Moza has tried to give as many options as possible for mounting up. You can also purchase a desk mount to provide further mounting options if you are desk bound or otherwise have difficulty mounting the shifter. The shifter comes in between the Thrustmaster TH8A and the Fanatec SQ shifter in price. It has considerably more mounting options than the Thrustmaster unit, but unlike these other two options, it doesn't feature a sequential mode. I would hazard a guess that many people looking to use a shifter like this would also be looking to use it with a car featuring a sequential. And if they only have a H pattern, they might be a little disappointed. It is a very well made piece of kit though, so hopefully it'll stand up to a lot of punishment, albeit with a more limited subset of vehicles in mind. Our long-term review will delve into this in more detail later in the year. Pit House is downloadable from the official Moza website, found at the bottom of the pages under Support Downloads. Installation is through a wizard and reasonably quick, albeit having the installer having to download additional components for you. There is an offline mode installer if you prefer that option though. Once installed, it pops up with a startup screen featuring Chinese and English text and a few checkboxes, like an option to start it with your computer. From here you can select your language preference. This is where things started to fall apart for me a little bit. Selecting English for me had no effect, and because it's a dual language screen, I didn't know that it wasn't working until I clicked OK, and that's when things went pretty bad. I was then presented with a full Chinese language application and had to hunt around for settings and change the language again from there. Incidentally, it still read English in the settings, so swapping it to another language and back again was essential to get things working. My next challenge was all the notices for a wheel and pedals that I didn't have. This isn't a huge deal, but a tad annoying when you purchase a device that is advertised as standalone. Talking of which, the marketing mentions an intelligent throttle blip. What it is less keen to mention, however, is this is only available if you own the Moza pedals running through Pit House. Now, I wasn't too bothered about that feature, but if you've purchased a device with one of these key points being that feature, beware that you have to be running the same brand's pedals. To be fair, I was wondering how they get around blipping a throttle on a third-party device, but there should be ways around that. Finally, setting up the shifter does require calibration. It uses an angle sensor instead of switches, and this should give it a longer lifespan. However, you have to determine the extent of that sensor. Pit House's calibration help doesn't offer an idea of best practice here, just saying that you should have to traverse the range of gears in 10 seconds. On my first 2 attempts, the shifter couldn't find second gear, so in the end I used a cross pattern going from reverse to 6th and then again from 2nd to 7th in order for all the gears to be successfully detected. Another option that you might want to do is going from forward to reverse in terms of, say, 3rd to 4th gear, and then going from all the way from reverse to 7th in terms of its range across the entire box. Once done though, everything was detected flawlessly, both in Pit House and in the games that I tried. It has been a very long time since I attempted heel and toe downshifts, and the world of sim racing is a very different place to what it was in 2010. It took me some time to get used to the practice again, and I still have plenty of lap time to find, but the immersion of using an H-pattern shifter is certainly not lost on me. Whilst initially finding gears wasn't entirely seamless, with more than the occasional wrong and possibly engine breaking downshift, eventually things were feeling much smoother. The gearbox has a very audible clunk in game to the extent that it is very easily heard even through the drone of everything else on my rig and whilst wearing a VR headset. This only gets louder with faster shift as you gain confidence. Each gear engagement does give you a strong sense of finding the gear though, so whilst misshifts are still possible, you know you haven't left the car in neutral. Considering VR racers have to use controls without being able to give them a second glance, I come to find this quite reassuring, especially during the early discovery phase. Perhaps I'm heavy-handed, but I didn't find the reverse lock to be particularly effective, the lightest touch getting me into reverse rather than first. Definitely something you wouldn't want to do in a race. Overall, the shifter feels great pounding around the track in the cars that I tried. Now I'm looking forward to further putting it through its paces with some historic Formula racing in AMS2. Initial installation wasn't the smoothest experience. Having an angle sensor to find gears sounds like a nice idea, but I found myself having to calibrate the stick several times before second gear was successfully found. This could be mitigated through better instructions on how to traverse the gears in order for the angle sensor to be properly calibrated. I found going to the extremes, reverse to 6th and 2nd to 7th, worked best, but a lack of advice here caused unnecessary delays. Talking about unnecessary delays, Pit House staying in Chinese when I've selected English was a pain. I had to work out which button corresponded to settings, swap out to another language, and then back to English to actually be using English. This certainly could use some improvement. It's a shame that without using Moza pedals, you cannot use the auto blip software feature for the shifter. Not a huge deal, and it did make me practice heel and toe, but it would be nice if that information was clearer prior to purchase, and if that was a clincher for you, you'd be sorely disappointed. The shifter itself feels of very good quality, and whilst the angle sensor is a pain to set up, it should stand the test of time. It's a shame it doesn't have a sequential mode, but the H pattern itself gives you a positive feeling for each shift, and whilst it is loud and a bit clunky, it does the job admirably well. One thing I do find mildly concerning with the shifter, however, is how easy it is to shift in reverse. 7th gear is less of a problem, and it might be the angle that I'm shifting from, putting extra downward pressure on the device in the lower gear ranges. I'm sure to keep an eye on the gear locks over time, but if it weakens at all, that could be very problematic. I still find it unnecessary for 7th gear to be locked, but you could easily use that as an alternative reverse gear if you prefer yours to be on the far right of the gear range. The shifter then is far from perfect. The non-adjustable gear locks seem a little on the light side, certainly not as robust as you might have in your road car. Software is clunky and occasionally error prone, and it would be nice if further guidance was provided for you for correct calibration. The feature list is misleading and aimed mostly at full rig Moza users. A disclaimer on this should be present on the official website, but it is lacking. In actual use, it does feel very well built and gives you a positive feel of gear engagement. It's certainly well made and should last a long time, but the lack of a sequential option does mean its value proposition is a little bit more limited than some of its competitors. It is true that the number of cars using an H-pattern shifter is diminishing all the time, but thankfully in sim racing we have historic cars to fall back on. We have great cars like the immersion you feel from AMS2's Formula Retro Gen, or iRacing's Formula V, the Formula Ford 1600, and so on and so forth. Talking of the Formula Ford, I found 2 seconds over the course of testing this gearbox. That still makes me slow compared to what I am like with the sequential gear, but considering how rusty I am with heel toe, I think that's quite an improvement, and I still have bags of time to find. So I'm really looking forward to this immersive experience in a race whilst grinding through some gears when I make some mistakes and just having some actual fun. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Moza HGP Shifter. It's certainly not perfect, but it's a well-built device and I've had a lot of fun playing with it. If you've enjoyed this review, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up so other people can find it too. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, don't forget to mash that subscribe button. That'll help other people find me and it supports me greatly. Now, with nothing else left to be said, I'm going to go back and pound some laps out in the Formula Ford. So goodbye for now and see you later.
That lap was a 51.5.